I'm really, really happy to be here. My name is Alan Burns. For the past 30-something years, I've helped radio stations grow audience in virtually every format in the U.S. and 17 other countries. I'm a novelty and variety junkie. I love new challenges. So I was really thrilled when I got a phone call from CMB saying, we think that contemporary Christian music radio could grow its format to 50 million weekly listeners, 50 million Cume. But we also think that we might need an outside perspective on whether that's really doable, and if so, how we might go about accomplishing it. A couple of things before we jump in here. First, I am indeed an outsider. I don't have a long history of programming or consulting in contemporary Christian music radio. So I'm definitely an outsider. I definitely don't know everything. In fact, my wife occasionally suggests I don't know anything. Outside perspectives can be really helpful. In fact, most industries that are revolutionized, as so many have been in the past 30 years or so, it's almost always by an outsider who can see things a little bit differently. That brings me to the second point I want to make, which is we are definitely not trying to revolutionize contemporary Christian music radio. It doesn't need it. It's a strong format. It has terrific music and tons of great people. Especially, I've met a ton of them, in the past year or so, and I'm impressed. There are tons of great people doing heroic jobs, so it doesn't need to be revolutionized. All we hope to do in the next half hour or so is to give you some data and some tools to use, or not if you choose, to grow your audience, to bring more people into the tent to hear the music and message of Jesus Christ. I'm really humbled by the opportunity, and I appreciate you spending the next half hour or so with me. So growing from 32 million to 50 million, that's a lot. Brings up a bunch of questions right away. Some logical questions like, is it really doable? Who would we target? What do they want and need? And is what they want compatible with the existing core? Because we wouldn't want to put the existing core at risk. Mathematically, growing 32 to 50 is a 56% increase. Now that sounds, and is, a big increase in Cume. Radio stations frequently don't do that unless they're brand new and come roaring out of the box. But if you look at it another way, it's really only a small slice, 6% of all of the people in America who don't listen to us. So we're looking for, 6% of America. That, if we accomplish it, would give us a Cume rating about equal to classic hits. Sounds reasonable, but classic hits has this huge library of music that's familiar to a wide swath of Americans. So is it really doable? How would we figure that out? We decided to study women 35 to 54 who aren't part of the Cume. The core demo of this format in the ratings analysis that I've seen and done is women 35 to 54. So we thought we'd look at more of those women who don't listen to us to find out what they need. And if we're looking for 6% of the country, we ought to be able to do better than that in the core, so maybe at least twice as much. So we're looking for a solution that could attract maybe 12% of women 35 to 54. We did the research in two stages. The first was focus groups done in Dallas in April with women 35 to 54 who don't Cume the format weekly. And I wanted to give you at least a small taste of some of the stuff we heard in the focus groups. Here's 35 to 44-year-old women. I think I have to click this one more.
I didn't know there was a Christian radio station, to be honest.
Not into I don't relate to it.
I only listen mostly to the radio when I am driving around, and that's not the time I want to hear that music. When I'm driving, I want upbeat. Yes, I want to have fun when I'm driving. I don't want to be calmed down. It's just a little over the top with the, I don't know, I don't want to be inspired all the time. It sounds horrible. I don't need a sermon. Like, I just want to hear a good song to kind of keep me going. I still love Jesus. Yes, it doesn't make me a bad Christian.
So that's 35 to 44. Here's what the 45 to 54-year-olds said.
The whole idea behind Christianity, and this is where a lot of people are having that their backup about Christians is they feel too preached at and too judged. When Christ-like is supposed to be loving and giving and caring. And so it's kind of a, you know, the label has gotten,
Muddied.
yeah.
That was my thing, was I don't like Christian radio because they preach at me. And if I wanted to be preached at, I could go to church.
So note some of the words that we heard these women use. Preachy, judgmental. Some of them aren't aware that we exist on the dial, even in Dallas. They're looking for upbeat and fun. They want a good song to keep them going. Those phrases and words will come back around, among other things, as we go through this. Stage 2 is what we're going to talk about most here. A national study that we just completed. It was 461 women, 35 to 54, Caucasian or Hispanic, in markets with at least one contemporary Christian music radio station. 400 of them are not weekly Cumers to the format, and 61 were weekly core. Now that's 16% of the total sample, which is artificially high. We boosted that part of the sample to make sure we had enough people in the cell to look at, because we're going to compare our prospects to our core as we go through. The survey was done online, 83 questions, and we just finished it. It's very fresh research. I want to call attention to how these women were recruited. The non-Cumers of the format were randomly recruited from markets around the country. The core were recruited from station databases, CCM station databases. So these women are not just Cume, they're not just P1s. They are really aggressively engaged with the radio station, and many of them are donors. So when we talk about core, remember, we're talking about a super core here. So before we jump into the data, I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to see. At least my conclusion is reaching or exceeding 50 million is definitely doable without jeopardizing the core in any way. The format has a large phantom Cume, which I'll define, and clear ways to motivate them and attract totally new Cume. It looks like the number one thing that CCM can do is to be more fun to listen to and probably a little more familiar as well. Slower music is not the format's dominant music style, and we need to make better use of the core, and we can as Cume recruiters. So we're going to dive into the data now, and even though I've pared this down to fit our 35-minute window, I'm going to have to go through it pretty quickly. So a piece of advice. If I were you, I wouldn't try to hold on to any numbers at all, because the actual number, whether it's 56 or 57, doesn't matter that much. The numbers will be available, most of them, online on the CMB website later. What I would suggest you do instead is look at the patterns that emerge and the major points as we go through here. So, first thing we saw was major differences between the core and the non-Cumers, as you might expect. The core is older. They're much more likely to tell us that it's very important to them to feel closer to God. They're much more likely to like or love our music. They're twice as likely to identify as Christian. They go to church most weeks, and they're quite a bit more conservative than our prospects. So that's a lot of big differences, and those are only some of them. At first glance, and third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, after several days of looking at this, it almost seemed to be an insurmountable difference. But there's always a way, right? There's got to be a way to accomplish a goal, and there is. It's a statistical tool called cluster analysis. Cluster analysis looks at every respondent and every response by every respondent, which in this case is about 600,000 data points, and tries to find groups of people who are like each other. Cluster analysis is terrific at segmenting markets or audiences. The goal, the hope here, is that we would find a cluster that contained most or all of our listeners and a lot of women who were like them. And the good news is we did. We found two clusters. For the moment, I'm going to call them C1 and C2, Cluster 1, Cluster 2. Cluster 1's more likely to identify as Christian, to go to church most weeks, to like or love our music. They're more likely, 4 times more likely, to have ever listened to a Christian music station. They're more aware of a CCM station existing in their market. And their number one comment, I think these comments really tell the story. Cluster 1 says Christian stations are uplifting and encouraging. Cluster 2 says, they're too preachy. The most important difference, though, is that 100%, every one of our core listeners fell into Cluster 1, along with 41% of the non-listeners. So remember, we were looking for a solution that might work for 12% of women 35 to 54. Here we found one that, or we found a cluster at least, that contains 41% of them. And 41% of women 35 to 54 is 16 million. If you add that to our 32, we're almost at 50 right there, just with the core, but there will be a lot of spillover. 41% of all the core, all the non-Cumers in the U.S. is 120 million. So I think we have a big enough pool of people to target. Here's the age composition. By the way, that last slide will be the last time I refer to Cluster 2 because they are irrelevant at this point. We'll spend the rest of this comparing Cluster 1, which I call prospects, to the core. The age composition of the prospects is almost equally balanced, younger and older. They tend to be married. 6 out of 10 of them are married. About half have children at home. Same number have donated to a religious charity in the past year. The plurality of them say they're very happy, but the happiness average for this group as a whole is somewhat happy, so they could be a little bit happier. This is important, I think. Cluster 1, our prospects are about equally balanced between women who say they are conservative or very conservative and women who say they're moderate or progressive. That's less conservative than our core. 2/3 of our core identifies as conservative or very. That will come back as well. So a good starting point is to find out what all of these women think about us. Are we starting this project in a perceptual hole or not? From those focus group comments, you would think we are, but those focus groups were with all women 35-54, or at least the representatives of them. And we're not looking now for all 35 to 54s. We're looking at a particular market segment. And the good news is, with those women, things are good. The prospects, by the way, as we go through here, the top 5 items on a ranker are going to be coded in green. The top 5 items with the prospects are the same items as with the core. They say we're uplifting and encouraging, positive, inspiring. The music has some meaning, and it makes you feel closer to God. So that's great. We're not starting at a real disadvantage here. One thing that I should point out here is the core tends to think that the format picks them up and makes them feel good. The prospects, not so much. So what do these women need and want and love, and is it compatible with our core? Before we even started talking about radio, we asked them to tell us how important or desirable each of the items on this 15-word or phrase list here is. And it wasn't about radio, it's just in your life, how important. So here's what was very important or very desirable to the prospects. The top 5 things there are in green. And by the way, cells in dark blue are frequencies that are above average. Okay, so the prospects: hope, love, positivity, joy, feeling close to God, feeling good about life. The great news, again, is that the top 5 for the prospects is virtually identical to the top 5 for the core. So we don't have to worry about any kind of split focus here. Both our existing listeners and the listeners we want to get really at the top want the same things. However, I will point out a difference, not at the very top of the list, but throughout this ranker. The prospects place more emphasis than the core does on feeling good in general, feeling good about life, being happy, having fun, being in a better mood. By the way, there's a body of good research out that proves to my satisfaction that the most basic reason people listen to music radio is to get into a better mood. And that's what the prospects certainly want to do. Then we gave everybody a list of 28 programming elements that conceivably could be put on a CCM station. It ranged from weather and traffic to daily prayer. We asked them to rate it on a scale that ran from "I love it and I'd listen all the time" to I really don't like it, and I would never listen to it. Here is the ranker of prospects. Here's what they want. They are all about, as we sort of saw already, they're about feeling good. Hearing your favorite song makes you feel good. Hearing it without commercials feels good. Laughter feels good. Hosts who are fun feels good. They want to be picked up and made to feel good. And that's the prospects. And you see, by the way, there are a ton of above average scores on everything here. The core, it's ranked by the core now, wants different stuff. You can tell already that the top 5 for these two groups is not the same. The core wants contemporary Christian music. They want to feel closer to God. They too like long periods of commercial-free music. They want a station that's a good influence on their family, and they want songs of praise and worship for God. Well, now, do we have a problem? The top items for the prospects are not the top items for the core. I don't think so, because the top items for the core are really baked into the format. They're why the core is the core, and we're not going to certainly change any of that. But to grow, we've got to at least give the prospects the things they want the most, as long as they're compatible with our core, and they are. All of these items here, well, I'm going to back up. I think it actually looks better on that previous slide. You see here, all of the prospects' top items are above average with the core. So it's things like this. These are the things that appeal to new Cume and are really popular with the core. Commercial free, play my favorite songs, and you know there's a thing that a song has to be before it can be favorite, and that's familiar. Make me laugh, give me hosts who are fun, pick me up and make me feel good. So it would seem that in order to grow, the format needs to be a little bit more fun and maybe a little bit more familiar. And we'll talk about familiarity a bit more in a second here. Speaking of music, we took a short look under the hood. CCM, like country, is not very fragmented musically, so we took a short, basic look via montages. With montages, we tested 5 sounds or concepts. 2 kinds of pop, I'll explain that in a second. Pop rock, slow songs, and traditional hymns. Now, you might wonder why traditional hymns were included here, because they have really no role in the format. All they're there for is because I wanted to see whether association with traditional hymns was a misconception that non-listeners might have about the format. And they do associate it to some degree, but it's not at the point that it dominates the format. It's not an issue to worry about, so we won't talk about hymns much. Masked CCM pop were montages created from hooks with lyrics that were not overtly religious. Unmasked pop were hooks that had overtly religious lyrics. We just wanted to see if that difference resulted in a difference in appeal to non-listeners. So here are the average scores. They'll be ranked by prospects when they first come up. Pop rock was number 1. And I'll give you a clue as to a couple of patterns we're going to see as we go through here. 1, pop rock will tend to be at or very near the top almost everywhere. And the prospects score the music lower than the Cume, totally illogical because they're less familiar with the music than the Cume. So pop rock, number 1 with the prospects, then one of the pop versions, then slower songs, and then unmasked pop. Now, another thing that we'll see pretty much as we go through here is there's not a big difference in score from the top to the bottom, at least if we omit hymns. Not a big difference in score. So the format is not really fragmented musically in this sense, but there are some slight differences. So hymns are at the bottom, of course, and they always will be here. Now ranked by the core, pop rock again. So pop rock is number 1 with prospects. It's number 1 with the core. Unmasked pop is number 2. Masked pop number 3. Slow ballads. That's redundant, I know. Slow songs, and then hymns. So pop rock at the top. Slower songs tend to be a little further down there. Now, what about age? Are there differences by age? We'll look at the total sample here. That includes all of the non-listeners, not just our prospects. So the scores are going to be really low, but focus on the ranking. Again, unmasked pop, so pop, pop, pop rock, and then the slow songs. 45 to 54, pop, pop rock, unmasked pop, and then slow ballads. Okay? Is it different within the core? 35 to 54 core listeners, pop rock, pop, pop, slow. 45 to 54, pop, pop rock, pop, slow. So again, at the risk of being redundant, pop rock tends to lead, and the slower songs as a sound lag the sounds and songs with energy. Moving on from the music to Phantom Cume, which I promised to talk about earlier. Phantom Cume are people who listen to your radio station or your format, but not often enough to show up in the weekly Cume. CCM's is substantial, and that's not necessarily a problem. In this case, we should look at it as an asset. More than 4 out of 10 of non-listener prospects Cume this format every month. 4 out of 10 already listen at least monthly. They just don't show up in the weekly Cume. So if we could motivate those people to listen more frequently, right there we've got a nice Cume increase. Quite a bit of Cume increase. By the way, this is not exactly a secret, but it's worth repeating. A lot of people still haven't internalized this. Virtually every kind of rating increase is based on getting listeners to listen more frequently, not longer. When they listen more often, they're contributing more TSL to you. When a person who doesn't listens at all, that's an increase in frequency. When a monthly person is motivated to listen more frequently, they show up as weekly Cume. When the Cume is motivated to listen more frequently, they show up as TSL, and so on till the point they get to be a P1. So ratings increases are almost always based on increasing frequency. And how do you do that? By giving them what they want and need, which is the stuff we've just been talking about here. So there's another way to increase your Cume, and that is to use your listeners as ambassadors. This format, I'm sure Paul Jacobs yesterday said something along the lines of, CCM has the highest net promoter score of any format in radio, and it is true. 83% of our prospects say that they would be likely to try a radio station they don't normally listen to if a good friend said he or she really liked it. You know, of course, that word of mouth is the best, absolutely by far the best kind of marketing there is. 83% would try it if somebody encouraged them, and our core listeners are absolutely inclined to do so. 82% of them said they were absolutely, that is a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale of how likely, absolutely be willing to recommend the station to a friend. Here's the issue. Only 30% of our core can remember ever being asked to recommend the station by the Christian station they listen to. Only less than a third. Now, 46% can't recall, and certainly some of those people we would assume have been asked at some point, but clearly not often or not recently enough to be recalled. Piece of good news here, another piece of good news, there's lots of good news. Another piece of good news is that it is important to our core that we attract new people to the Word and music of God. It's not quite as important as exalting and worshiping God, but they say, almost amazingly, that it's more important than serving its existing listeners, which means them. Now, we know, all of us know, I think, that if you don't take care of your listeners, they'll stop being your listeners. So, we can't totally turn our attention to just building core, although there's not much risk in it. But the second line there is a great motivating reason to ask your Cume to recommend your radio station. They think it's important to attract new people to the Word and music, and they would be happy to help in that effort. So we looked at a lot of data, and before jumping to recommendations, I thought it might be worth summarizing what I think are the major points here. First of all, reaching 50 million is doable. Our core thinks bringing in new people is important. They're happy to help. 43% of our prospects are already listening monthly. We can serve them better and attract completely new Cume without jeopardizing the core at all by focusing on this market segment that includes all of our core and 41% of our non-listening population. That's 120 million people nationally. The biggest needs, which are also the best language to use, are hope, love, positivity, joy, feeling good about life, and also feeling closer to God, which for some reason didn't make it onto the slide here. Commercial-free music is very appealing to both the core and the new Cume, as is playing their favorite songs, which again, I'm going to kind of pound this point a little bit, have to be familiar before they can be favorite. Several items that are positive with our core, above average and appeal, are really important to attract new listeners. Fun host, making the listener laugh, picking them up, making them feel good. Pop rock is the best liked CCM music style with both the core and the best prospects. The slower, lower energy music doesn't dominate with either. And Christian stations can and need to make better use of the core as ambassadors. Finally, the best prospects, and definitely the younger prospects, are not as conservative as the core. So, jumping into recommendations. First of all, less than half of all of our prospects are aware that we exist on the dial in their market, and they certainly don't know why they should listen. So we have to go off of our air to external means of promoting the radio station, make people aware, and tell them why to listen. That means whatever you can. Television, billboards, social media, targeted YouTube ads, bumper stickers, bus benches, whatever you can do. And certainly include our existing listeners in that. Our Cume feels it's important, our core feels it's important to attract new listeners that are willing to help. Increase the presence of fun and laughter and feeling good. Continue to use powerful words and phrases as you do, like hope and love, positivity and joy. Personally, my reading of this is that I believe positivity, joy, and feeling good will give you the biggest impact for several reasons. One is positivity shows up huge as both a need and a benefit, an attribute of a radio station, a Christian contemporary radio station, with both the Cume and the core, the existing prospects and the core. Feeling good is something that almost everybody wants almost all of the time. And like I said, it's the most basic reason to listen to music radio. Joy is, I think, an especially powerful word because it has so many good connotations. Spiritual joy, earthly fun, and positivity. As we've talked about already, if you can offer commercial-free music, do so. If you're a commercial station, there are ways to structure your commercial load so that you can offer commercial-free hours or blocks or even days sometimes. And if you're a non-com, be careful. Don't make the mistake of assuming your listeners hear you already as non-commercial, as commercial-free, because they don't. Listeners hear any message about the station for the station as a commercial. So they're going to hear your underwriting messages as commercials as well, and you'll need to structure those if you want to offer commercial-free periods. Now, at this point, I want to show you 3 slides, 3 stills from a television campaign that I think does a really good job of exhibiting a number of these points. External marketing, joy, positivity, feeling good, and commercial-free, all in one television campaign. The station's name is Joy. The people in this commercial are obviously having fun. The commercial itself promotes laughter. People are laughing in the commercial, and laughter is part of the commercial. I didn't put that word up there. And here's commercial-free. Start your morning commercial-free with Joy FM. That's a pretty good campaign. I'm not surprised that Joy's ratings are really good. Now, moving on to music recommendations. Again, playing favorite songs means playing familiar songs and not just to your super core. How does a song become familiar to new listeners, people who aren't yet listening heavily to the format? The answer is very slowly, very slowly. So hold on to your top testing currents a long time. I wouldn't worry much about burn, Your audience would rather hear a familiar song they like, even though it might not be novel anymore, than an unfamiliar song. They truly would. You didn't see playing new unfamiliar music anywhere near the top of the needs or programming elements. So hold on to your currents a long time, keep them in power a long time. By the way, I once consulted years ago a radio station here in Orlando that there was one song that kept playing in power for 53 weeks. That station, by the way, was #1 in the market at the time. So hold on to currents, keep them in power, keep the big hits in power, and then when you're done with them, I like to step them down to what I call a post-power category, which spins like a current, but it functions more like a recurrent. Recurrents are your friend. Keep your recurrents around, use more of them, and I would consider including monthly cumers in your music research. It slows down the movement of songs through the system, which is a good thing, and it gives you a way to actually watch how long it takes the less frequent newer listeners to become familiar with a song. Now, I've already admitted that I'm the man from Mars here without a long history in the format. So I brought some backup today. 3 years ago, here at Momentum, Mark Ramsey, who's a smart guy and a friend, presented a study that I thought was really, really great. It was not a survey. It was an actual correlation of CCM station behaviors and policies to the ratings outcome. And I want to show you 3 slides here. This slide says the fewer songs the station played, the higher the ratings, both Cume and share. And that's because fewer songs means higher firepower. Now, of course, playing fewer songs means you have to rotate them a little bit more often. This slide says that the longer songs stayed in currents, the higher the rating. This slide says the longer they stayed in recurrence, the higher the ratings. So it's not just me here, folks. So hang on to your big hits, recurrence are your friend, and consider including the monthly Cume. Continue the mix of pop rock, and slower songs. If anything should be #1 in that mix, it would be pop rock. Don't let tempo drag. Remember, the slower songs as a sound lag the more energetic sounds. So keep the tempo up, keep it, I would say, medium up. Don't let it drag because slow doesn't feel good. And the final music recommendation is don't let the music research, which are individual songs, determine your strategy and your essence, the overall sound and feel of the radio station. The overall radio station, what your strategy is, the sound, the benefits that you've planned to deliver to your audience is much more important than any individual song. Don't let music testing take you off strategy. Don't base your strategy on music testing. I'll give you an example. If your strategy is to be, among other things, a medium up-tempo radio station, and you get a music research report that comes back clogged at the top with slow songs, you can't let that take you off your strategy. You use your strategy to decide what kind of songs, and then your music test tells you which of the songs within a given kind you should play. So be careful about letting music research take you off of strategy. One final recommendation, I got ahead of myself. One final recommendation here, don't be too socially conservative, and I would leave politics alone completely. It's just too divisive. The supercore is very conservative, but all of your potential growth, especially if you want to grow with younger listeners, is going to be less so. So don't be less Christian, just be more welcoming and inclusive of other viewpoints. So that's the last recommendation. I want to sum up this project and the conclusions and the recommendations, and I think I can do it really with sort of two statements here. 2 statements, I think it'll do the whole job. People clearly want to feel God. They want to feel His presence. They also want to feel good. And we can help people do both things. And if we do, we will bring more people to the music and message of Jesus Christ. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.